Hey guys, tonight we step right into a world you probably wouldn't want to visit unless you enjoy questionable stew, mud in every crevice of your shoes, and a faint, unsettling smell that never quite goes away. It's the year 1347, and you're a peasant in the European countryside. The sun hasn't even peeked over the thatched rooftops yet, but the air already feels sharp with cold, the kind that slides into your bones. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster sounds like it's regretting life choices. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I want to see where you're listening from, and maybe imagine you huddled under a blanket like the rest of us. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The day begins with your toes already numb. Your straw bed has left its mark on your back in a pattern resembling an abstract art piece, and your first breath tastes faintly of last night's cabbage soup. You pull on a tunic that's been patched so many times it might legally count as a quilt, and step outside into the damp. The village is quiet, except for the bleating of sheep in the pen and the low mutter of a neighbor arguing with his wife over a misplaced bucket. It's planting season, which means your hands will be cold, wet, and sore long before the sun reaches its peak. You trudge toward the fields, the frost crunching under your leather shoes. They aren't really shoes, more like stitched-together hopes, but they keep most of the mud out. The smell of smoke drifts from chimneys, mingling with the tang of damp earth. Somewhere, the church bell clangs once, the sound rolling over the thatched rooftops. Normally, that's just the morning call to prayers, but lately there's been something else in the air, an unease you can't quite name. Work begins the way it always does, hoe in hand, bent spine, eyes scanning for weeds and stones. The earth here is heavy with clay, so every swing feels like trying to persuade a stubborn mule to move. Beside you, Thomas, who swears he once saw a ghost in the forest, works in silence, only breaking it to sniffle. He says it's just the cold. You hope it's just the cold. The wind is biting today, sending thin clouds skimming across the sky. They're tinted a strange pale yellow, the kind that makes you squint and wonder if something's wrong with your vision. The older folk mutter that strange skies mean strange times. You remember overhearing a priest once say that such omens could be signs from God. Mainstream historical fact. In the mid-14th century, omens and astrological events were often linked in people's minds to earthly disasters, from floods to disease. By midday, your back aches, your knees are wet, and your fingers are turning red. You pause to take a sip of the watery ale from your flask. It's safer than the village's well water, which sometimes tastes like iron and moss. Across the field, you spot a small group by the road, talking in hushed voices. You wander closer on the pretense of checking the fence and catch fragments. Port town, many dead. Carts full of, before they trail off as you approach. One of them, Greta, glances at you with that tight smile people wear when they've decided you don't need to know something. But her eyes give her away. There's fear there, sharp as a blade. You ask what's going on, but all she says is, "Not here. Later." That afternoon, you're sent to fetch more seed from the barn. And on the way back, you notice something odd. Fewer birds. The hedgerow where sparrows normally dart in and out is strangely still. The air feels thicker somehow. Fringe tidbit. Some medieval chroniclers claimed that before great outbreaks, the air would grow heavy and corrupted, carrying the stench of decay even before the first deaths. Whether this was true or just fear-shaping perception, no one can say for sure. You shrug it off, telling yourself it's just the cold season keeping the birds away. But still, you keep glancing upward. By the time the sun dips low, painting the fields in orange and gold, you've nearly convinced yourself you imagine the odd tension in the air. People are tired. People worry about all sorts of things. Wolves, harvests, whether the miller is cheating them. The smell of stew floats from your home, thick with leeks and whatever salted meat was left in the barrel. You sit by the fire, boots off, letting the warmth creep into your bones. For a few moments, the only sounds are the crackle of wood and the soft clink of your spoon against the bowl. Yet, when you lie down later, the images linger, the hushed whispers, the heavy sky, the still hedgerow. You tell yourself it's nothing, but your dreams are uneasy. Shadows flitting at the edge of torchlight and the distant rumble of a cartwheel on cobblestones. Historians still argue whether medieval villagers truly sensed the plague before it arrived, or whether those memories were rewritten by survivors after the fact. All you know is that something feels like it's coming. The next morning starts with the sharp clink of a metal latch. You crack open the wooden shutter to find the sky wrapped in low clouds, the kind that sit heavy and gray like a damp wool cloak thrown over the village. The air smells faintly of wet soil and chimney smoke, but also of something sharper, metallic, like the tang of iron after a cut. You pull on your tunic and step outside. Down the lane, the sound of wheels and hooves draws your attention. A small cart approaches, pulled by a bony mare with a coat like matted rope. The man riding it isn't from here. You'd remember his face. He's thin, wearing a patched coat the color of dusty moss, and has the weathered skin of someone who's lived more on roads than under a roof. A peddler. His cart rattles with bundles wrapped in cloth, jugs sealed with wax, and baskets covered in straw. Normally, this would be cause for excitement. New goods, new stories, maybe even some gossip from the next town over. But as he draws near, there's no cheerful call of greeting. He just raises one hand in a tired wave, eyes scanning the road as if expecting someone to stop him, someone with less than friendly intentions. You meet him outside the smithy, where a few villagers have already gathered. Old Merrick, the blacksmith, steps forward. "Where from?" he asks, his voice carrying the same weight as a magistrate's question. The peddler hesitates, then says, "Bristol." The name hangs in the cold air. Mainstream historical fact. Bristol, one of England's busiest ports in the 14th century, was among the first cities hit hard by the Black Death after it arrived from the continent. Ships brought not just goods, but disease, sometimes with entire crews dead before reaching harbor. You've heard of Bristol, though you've never seen the sea. It's far yet close enough for news and trouble to travel. The peddler shifts in his seat, then adds, "Half the street shut, doors barred. Some say the air itself's gone bad. I saw carts. Full. The word full does not need explaining." Someone mutters a prayer under their breath. Greta, the same Greta who brushed you off yesterday, shoots you a look that says, "This is what I meant." The peddler goes on, speaking in that half-whisper people use when naming something they fear might hear its own mention. He talks of whole families gone in a week, of markets silent except for crows, of sailors coughing blood on the docks. Fringe tidbit. In some port towns, people swore the sickness came not from rats or air, but from cursed cargo, silks dyed in foreign colors or spices packed with strange dust. Some claimed you could catch death simply by wearing a garment that had crossed the wrong sea. The mood sours quickly. Some villagers turn away, muttering about sending the stranger on his way before he brings trouble. Others lean in closer, hungry for every scrap of news, no matter how grim. You stand somewhere between, feeling a creeping chill that has nothing to do with the weather. The peddler doesn't stay long. He trades a few sacks of dried beans for wool, swaps a dented copper pot for eggs, and refuses every offer of food to eat here. Before leaving, he leans down toward you, why you're not sure, and says, "If you've got kin in the cities, send word now. And if you see a cart with a black cloth over it, don't look inside." Then he clicks his tongue, and the mare lurches forward, cart rattling down the muddy lane until it's swallowed by the mist. The rest of the day feels heavier. Conversations are shorter, tempers quicker. In the fields, even the crows seem quieter, picking at the furrows as if aware of something you can't yet see. At the well, you overhear two women arguing. One swears the sickness is spread by the air. The other insists it's God's punishment for sins. Hers or yours? She's not sure. Historians still argue whether fear traveled faster than the plague itself in these early months. Letters, gossip, and traveling merchants may have spread panic weeks before the first cases appeared in some villages. That night, your mother bars the door with an extra beam. She says it's to keep out wolves. There haven't been wolves this close to the village in years. You eat in near silence, the crackle of the hearth louder than any words. When you lie down, you think about Bristol, a place you've never been, but now feels like a shadow stretching toward your bed. You wonder if the stranger's cart will roll into another village tomorrow, carrying stories that curdle the air like spoiled milk. Somewhere, far beyond the hedgerows, a sickness is moving. And though you can't yet see it, you feel it the way you feel a storm before it breaks. Pressure in the chest, a restless hum under your skin. You wake before the rooster this time, pulled from sleep by a thin light spilling through the gap in the shutters. The morning air feels wrong, not colder exactly, but stiller, like the world is holding its breath. You throw on your tunic, step outside, and almost trip over a chicken that's taken to sleeping right against your door for warmth. It clucks irritably, as if you're the rude one. The sky makes you pause. It's not the usual dull blue-gray of autumn mornings. Instead, a strange reddish hue clings to the horizon, bleeding up into streaks of copper and pink. You've seen red skies before, sunsets that made the clouds look like burning embers. But this is different. This is morning, and the sun hasn't even cleared the tree line. Greta is already at the well, drawing water with quick, jerky pulls. She notices you staring at the sky. "Saw it last night, too," she says. The whole West looked like it was on fire. Mainstream historical fact. Many people in the 14th century believed celestial phenomena, red skies, unusual eclipses, or bright comets, were signs of divine displeasure or harbingers of disaster. Chroniclers recorded strange weather and astronomical events alongside outbreaks of plague as if they were part of the same story. You keep working, but the sky seems to follow you. Even as the sun climbs higher, the colors linger, washed out but stubborn. While gathering kindling near the edge of the wood, you find Thomas there, chewing a blade of grass and staring upward like he's waiting for the clouds to answer a question. They say there's a star with a tail, he murmurs when you ask what he's looking for. Saw it last night. Looked like it was sweeping across the heavens. My grandfather swore that's how pestilence comes, from stars spilling poison into the air. Fringe tidbit. Some medieval medical theories tied plague to miasma, caused by planetary conjunctions or poisoned air falling from comets. One 14th century treatise even claimed a specific conjunction in 1345 was to blame for the Black Death's onset. The rest of the day is filled with small, uneasy moments. A neighbor swears her milk soured faster than usual. Someone finds a dead fox by the road with no visible wounds. The church bell rings twice for a funeral you didn't know was happening. Historians still argue whether these details, dead animals, strange skies, were truly linked to the plague or were later woven into the memory of it. In times of fear, people notice patterns everywhere, even if the patterns are just coincidence. That evening, the village gathers near the green for a rare meeting. Father Anselm stands in front of the chapel, robes catching the flicker of torchlight. His voice is low, but carries. The signs in the heavens, the tales from the cities, they are warnings, he says. We must pray, confess, purify ourselves, keep the Sabbath strictly. No more drinking or fighting in the tavern. From the back, someone mutters that the tavern's ale is too thin to cause any trouble anyway. A few laugh, quietly, like laughter might offend the sky itself. Anselm goes on to describe a procession planned for Sunday. Everyone will walk the boundary of the village carrying holy relics, chanting hymns. The Lord will see our devotion, he promises, and turn his wrath away. As the crowd disperses, you glance upward one last time. The sky is dark now, but there, a faint smear of light, almost like a pale feather, stretching across the stars. You're not sure if it's what Thomas saw or if your eyes are playing tricks. You head home, trying to convince yourself that stars can't hurt you, that light in the sky is just light. But the image lingers in your mind long after you've pulled the blanket over your head, warm breath making a small, safe pocket in the chill air. You dream of walking across a field under that same red sky, your shadow stretching longer and longer until it falls over the whole village. Somewhere behind you, something is following, but no matter how fast you turn, you never quite see it. The morning starts with the usual sounds, the creak of the barn door, the splash of water from the well. But there's something else today, a faint cough. Not yours, not anyone in your house. It's drifting from the lane, sharp and dry like the bark of a restless dog. You glance out and see Thomas leaning against the fence post. His shoulders rise and fall faster than they should, and when he notices you looking, he straightens like nothing's wrong. Cold in the lungs, he says, voice thin. Been working too much in the damp. You nod, though it doesn't feel like the whole truth. He's younger than you, strong enough to lift a sack of grain without help, and usually grins at his own bad jokes. Now his eyes look sunken, the skin under them the color of old parchment. By mid-morning, more people are missing from the fields. At first, You think they've been sent to tend other chores, but Greta tells you she passed 3 houses with shutters closed tight. No smoke from the chimneys, no sound from inside. Mainstream historical fact. When plague reached a village, families often shut themselves indoors at the first sign of illness, believing it might keep the sickness from spreading or keep others from harming them out of fear. At the well, the water's colder than usual, biting against your hands. A few others are there, but no one talks much. When someone does speak, it's in quick bursts. News of a fever here, a bad cough there, a child too tired to get out of bed. One man mutters that the air feels off, like it's thicker, harder to breathe. He swears he can smell something rotten in it. Fringe tidbit. Some people claim they could sense plague before it struck by smell alone, a scent like overripe fruit or a faint sweetness mixed with decay. Physicians of the time even recommended strong-smelling herbs and vinegar to counteract the poisoned air. That afternoon, you're sent to deliver a basket of eggs to the widow Ada at the far end of the village. When you knock, there's no answer. You push the door slightly and catch the smell first. Damp, stale, and something else. Faint, but sour. Inside, the shadows feel heavier than they should, even with daylight spilling through a side window. "Leave it there," comes her voice flat and strange. You set the basket down and back away without another word. By evening, the lane feels emptier. You notice small things, like how your own house seems too quiet when you step inside, how your mother keeps glancing toward the door as if expecting a knock. Dinner is thin soup, eaten without much conversation. The fire's crackle sounds almost too loud. Historians still argue whether the earliest coughs in small communities were always plague, or if fear made people see every sickness as a sign of it. In the 14th century, there was no easy way to tell. No tests, no microscopes, just the knowledge that once it began, it moved fast. That night, you wake to the sound of footsteps outside. Not hurried, slow, deliberate. You hold your breath, listening. They pass by, fading into the distance until all that's left is the faint rustle of wind in the thatch. You tell yourself it was just someone walking home late. But you can't quite shake the image of Thomas leaning on the fence, his cough echoing in the cold air, and the feeling that something invisible has just stepped into your village for the first time. You don't plan to leave, not at first, but by mid-morning, the decision feels made for you. The village is quieter than it's ever been. No laughter from the green, no children chasing chickens, not even the usual clatter from the smithy. Only the wind moves freely, sliding under doors and through bare branches, carrying the sound of your own footsteps back to you. Greta catches you by the well. Her eyes dart to the houses with bolted shutters. "It's starting," she whispers. "We should go before it gets bad." You glance toward your own home, where your mother is bent over the fire. She's not sick, not yet. But Greta's urgency is a weight on your chest. You don't have much to pack. A wool cloak patched at the hem, a crust of bread, and a wedge of hard cheese wrapped in cloth. A skin of ale, your father's old knife, not for fighting, but for cutting rope or splitting kindling. A small wooden carving of St. Roch, the patron saint of plague victims, that your mother presses into your palm without meeting your eyes. Mainstream historical fact. Some medieval people fled as soon as they heard plague was near, believing distance might protect them. Others stayed, fearing the journey itself would be more dangerous. For many peasants, leaving meant abandoning their only source of food and shelter. You and Greta head out on the North Road, following the ruts left by other carts. The air feels clearer out here, with open fields on either side. But it's not empty. Along the way, you pass others walking with hurried steps, heads down, carrying bundles slung over shoulders. A farmer you recognize from a nearby hamlet pulls his donkey cart to the side as you approach. The back is piled high with sacks and blankets, but a shape under one corner is still. Too still. You pretend not to notice, and so does Greta. By midday, you're well beyond the farmlands, you know. The road curves through a stand of bare oaks, their branches twisting overhead like blackened hands. You stop to eat, sitting on a fallen log. The bread is dry, the cheese sharp enough to make your teeth ache. Fringe tidbit. Some travelers carried posies of strong-smelling herbs, rosemary, lavender, rue, believing they could filter bad air. In certain regions it was common to tie a pouch of crushed garlic to your belt for invisible armor. Greta produces a bundle of dried lavender from her satchel and tucks it into the folds of her cloak. "For the air," she says, as if explaining something obvious. The road grows rougher, and by late afternoon, your legs feel heavy. You pass a small hamlet where most of the doors are barred. In one yard, a rooster stands alone, picking at the dirt as if it's forgotten what other chickens look like. A man in a long hooded coat stands at the far end of the lane. He's still a stone, watching you approach. When you're close enough to make out his face, thin with eyes that seem too bright, he calls out, "Turn back. There's nothing but death ahead." Historians still argue whether warnings like these came from kindness or from fear of strangers bringing the sickness with them. In many places, outsiders were chased away for their own safety, or to keep them from infecting the locals. You don't turn back. You keep walking until the village is out of sight. By the time you stop for the night, you're in the shelter of an old oak, its roots knotted like sleeping animals. You spread your cloak on the ground, listening to the distant creak of branches. Greta falls asleep quickly, but you lie awake, staring at the sliver of moon between the branches. You think of home, of your mother's hands pressing the wooden saint into yours, of the sound of footsteps passing your house in the night. The road ahead is dark, but so is the one behind. The road takes you deeper into the hills, where the wind slices through your cloak like a knife. You've been walking for hours, feet sore, when Greta spots a stone wall half hidden by brambles. Beyond it rises a low building with a slanted roof and a small bell tower, a monastery, though not one you've seen before. The wooden gate creaks as you push it open. Inside, the air smells of damp stone and something sharper. Herbs, maybe, or incense gone stale. A robed figure appears in the doorway, his head shaved clean except for a fringe of white hair. He doesn't ask your names, just studies your faces for a moment before saying, "Come in. You look cold." The hall is dim, lit by narrow windows and the orange glow of a fire in the hearth. A few other travelers sit along the walls, hunched over bowls of thin stew. You and Greta are given a place at a long wooden table, and the warmth of the bowl in your hands feels like a small miracle. Mainstream historical fact. Monasteries in medieval Europe often served as way stations for travelers and offered charity to the poor, though during times of plague, Many also became centers of care for the sick, or places where the disease spread quickly among close quarters. After you eat, Brother Matthew, the monk who greeted you, leads you to a side chamber where the air is thick with the scent of rosemary, sage, and something bitter you can't name. Bundles of herbs hang from the beams, their leaves brittle and gray. A pot of water steams over a small brazier, filling the room with warm vapor. These, he says, gesturing to the herbs, are God's gifts against the corruption of the air. Breathe deeply. Greta obeys, closing her eyes. You try, but the bitterness catches in your throat. Fringe tidbit. Some healers believe that boiling certain herbs could cleanse the air, and patients were encouraged to inhale the steam or sit in rooms filled with fragrant smoke. A few even burned aromatic resins like frankincense as a shield against evil vapors. Later, you help carry buckets from the well, passing through a courtyard where a stone basin overflows with water from a carved lion's head. A monk kneels nearby, scrubbing the basin with coarse sand. He tells you they clean it every day now, so no foulness can take hold. Inside the chapel, the brothers chant vespers. The sound is low and steady, rising and falling like waves. The flicker of candlelight paints the stone walls gold. You feel the muscles in your shoulders ease a little, as if the sound itself is a blanket. That night, you're given a pallet in a narrow cell. The walls are cool to the touch, the air smelling faintly of beeswax and dried thyme. Greta sleeps in the next cell over. Somewhere in the dark, a bell tolls once. Then again, you wake before dawn to the sound of shuffling feet in the corridor. Peering out, you see two monks carrying a small figure wrapped in cloth toward the chapel. They move quietly, but their faces are drawn, their eyes fixed on the floor. Historians still argue whether monasteries during the plague were havens or traps. Some accounts speak of miraculous recoveries, while others describe entire orders wiped out in weeks. In the morning, Brother Matthew gives you both a pouch of dried rosemary for the road and blesses you with a quick cross traced in the air. As you step back onto the lane, the scent of the monastery lingers. Herbs, candle smoke, and something else underneath. Faint but unmistakable. The smell of sickness. You and Greta walk in silence for a while. The wind tugs at your cloak, carrying with it the echo of chanting that seems to follow you down the road. By the third day on the road, your stomach has begun to protest loudly, as if reminding you that herbs and blessings don't fill bellies. The bread you brought from home is gone, and the last wedge of cheese has gone hard enough to chip a tooth. Greta hasn't complained yet, but she keeps glancing toward the hedgerows, probably thinking the same thing you are. What could be eaten without killing you? The answer for now is not much. When you crest a low ridge, the view ahead makes your heart sink. A once-tilled field lies in ruin, furrows choked with weeds, scarecrows collapsed in the dirt like they've given up. In the distance, a thatched roof sags in on itself. No smoke from its chimney, no sound. Mainstream historical fact. In plague years, whole stretches of farmland were left untended as workers died or fled, leading to severe food shortages and famine in many regions. Even survivors faced hunger as supply chains collapsed. You pass a stream and find a few limp watercress leaves along the bank. Greta scoops them up with the care of someone holding gold coins. The bitter greens taste of mud and cold water but at least they fill the mouth. By midday, the ache in your legs feels dull compared to the hollow pit in your stomach. You find a small orchard, abandoned, judging by the broken fence and the moss growing thick on the trunks. Most of the apples on the ground are bruised and soft, but a few clinging to the branches are still firm. Greta climbs up, shaking the limbs until 3 fall into the grass. You eat slowly, savoring each crisp bite. But hunger isn't the only thing gnawing at you. Fringe tidbit. Some villagers believe the plague could hide in food, especially in meat from sick animals or in fruit that had been touched by a corpse. Others swore that fasting could make the body less attractive to disease, though that belief was more convenient for empty cupboards than based on evidence. As you eat, you wonder if the orchard's former owners fell ill, or if they simply walked away and never came back. Toward evening, you reach a small hamlet nestled between 2 hills. It should be lively, smoke curling from chimneys, goats in the lane, but it's silent. The few houses you pass have doors bolted shut. In one window, a child peers out for a moment before vanishing behind the shutter. Greta suggests moving on, but your legs feel like lead. You settle under the eaves of a half-collapsed barn, out of the wind. The ground smells faintly of hay, but there's no sign of animals. Historians still argue whether famine during the plague years was caused more by loss of labor or by deliberate hoarding of food by the wealthy. Records show that in some areas, grain prices doubled while fields lay rotting. That night, the hunger keeps you awake as much as the cold. Every sound seems sharper. The creak of the barn timbers, the distant yip of a fox. Greta shifts beside you, muttering in her sleep. You stare into the darkness and imagine a table piled with bread, cheese, and roasted meat. Then you imagine the same table surrounded by empty chairs. By morning, the air smells of damp wood and frost. You find one more apple in your satchel, its skin mottled but still edible. You split it with Greta, eating in silence before setting out again. The road feels longer today, the hills steeper. Hunger has a way of making every step heavier, every thought slower. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a quiet fear whispers that the food may run out long before the sickness does. It's late afternoon when you hear it, a strange, rhythmic crunching on the road ahead. Not the clatter of cartwheels or the shuffle of weary feet. This is sharper, more deliberate. You glance at Greta, who slows her pace and tilts her head toward the sound. The figures appear over a rise in the road, and for a moment, you're not sure if you're awake or dreaming. They are dressed in long, dark robes that brush the ground, wide-brimmed hats shadowing their faces. But it's the masks that catch your breath. Long, curved beaks like giant birds, glass lenses where eyes should be. The beaked masks point toward you as they approach. Mainstream historical fact. These are plague doctors, though in truth, their presence was rare in many rural areas. The beak was stuffed with herbs or vinegar-soaked cloth, thought to filter poisoned air. Their clothing was designed to cover every inch of skin, a crude form of protection. One of them raises a gloved hand in greeting. "Travelers?" The voice is muffled, distorted by the mask. Greta nods cautiously. "From the south." The doctor tilts his head. "Keep your distance. Have you seen signs of the sickness?" You exchange glances, then describe the shuttered homes, the coughing, the strange stillness in the villages you've passed. The other doctor, A taller figure scribbles notes in a small book without saying a word. They step closer, not too close, and the shorter one produces a pouch of dried herbs. "For the air," he says, pressing it into Greta's hand. The scent is sharp and unfamiliar, peppery, with a hint of sweetness. Fringe tidbit. Some plague doctors added ground ambergris, whale secretion used in perfumes, to their mask herbs, believing it could ward off disease. Others carried small canes to poke or examine patients without touching them directly. The taller doctor finally speaks. "There's a camp to the east, just past the river, sick and well alike. If you go, keep your faces covered." You watch them leave, their dark forms swallowed by the mist. The road feels strangely empty, without the click of their boots. By evening, you reach the river. The air smells faintly of wood smoke and something else, sharp, almost metallic. Across the water, a cluster of tents flaps in the wind. People move between them slowly, some bent double, others sitting in groups with blankets pulled tight. Greta hesitates. "We could keep going." But your legs ache, and the thought of a fire and maybe food draws you forward. Inside the camp, the ground is churned mud. A woman ladles thin broth into wooden bowls, her face half hidden by a scarf. A boy coughs nearby, the sound rattling deep in his chest. Some tents are quiet, too quiet. Historians still argue whether camps like these saved lives or hastened death. They offered shelter for the homeless and sick, but they also gathered people close together when distance might have been the better defense. That night, you lie near the fire, the warmth seeping into your bones. The pouch of herbs from the plague doctor rests in your hands, its scent mingling with the smoke. Greta is already asleep, her face turned away from the firelight. Somewhere beyond the tents, you hear the faint crunch of boots on gravel, and you picture the two masked figures again, moving through the dark like silent birds. Morning comes slow in the camp, the damp air clinging to your skin as you stir from uneasy sleep. The fire has burned to embers, and a pale mist curls around the tents like something alive. Greta sits nearby, wrapping a cloth around her head and mouth, her eyes darting toward a commotion at the camp's far edge. A small crowd has gathered, voices rising sharp and tense. You stand, pulling your own scarf over your face, and edge closer. A man in a travel-stained cloak is on his knees in the mud, hands bound with rough rope. Two villagers shout over each other, accusing him of bringing the sickness here. He's not from their hamlet, they say. He arrived just before people started coughing. Mainstream historical fact. In the mid-1300s, fear and confusion about the plague often turned to suspicion of outsiders. Foreign traders, itinerant workers, and entire minority communities, most infamously Jews in Europe, were blamed and persecuted, sometimes violently, for spreading the disease. The bound man tries to speak, but his voice is drowned out by jeers. "He touched the water," one woman cries. "He's poisoned it." The accusation spreads like fire through dry grass. You can see it in their faces. Anger laced with desperation. A need for control when control has slipped away entirely. Greta leans close to your ear. "We should stay out of this," but your stomach knots as you watch a group of men drag the stranger toward the riverbank. The camp leader, a wiry man with a crooked hat, steps in front of them. "No blood here," he says firmly. "If you don't want him, send him away." But we don't kill in the camp. Fringe tidbit. In some regions, suspected plague bringers were subjected to bizarre tests. Instead of immediate execution, like making them hold red-hot iron to prove innocence, or submerging them in rivers to see if they floated, which supposedly revealed a guilty soul. The stranger is shoved beyond the camp boundary, his wrists freed but his face pale. He glances back once before disappearing into the mist, swallowed by the road you traveled yesterday. The crowd slowly disperses, muttering. You notice more eyes turning suspiciously toward new arrivals. Even Greta is quiet in a way that feels different, guarded. By midday, the mood has shifted. A woman you spoke to last night won't meet your gaze. A boy runs past and throws a small clod of mud at your feet, grinning nervously when you look down. The message is clear. You're not one of them. You and Greta decide to move on before evening. The camp leader meets you at the gate of tents. East, he says, pointing toward the rising sun. Keep to the old road, but mind the watchposts. They're closing villages. You travel in silence, the wind rattling dry leaves overhead. You can't shake the image of the bound man, his boots slipping in the mud as they pulled him away. Historians still argue whether fear-driven suspicion caused more deaths than the plague itself. Through executions, expulsions, and the collapse of mutual aid in communities that turned inward. That night, you camp under a skeletal oak, the air sharp with the promise of frost. Greta says little before falling asleep, and you lie awake listening to the wind, wondering if every place you reach from now on will see you first as a danger. The next morning, you follow the old road east as the camp leader advised. The dirt path snakes through thin woods, then out into open fields gone wild. Tall grass swallowing fence posts, hay bales sagging in the damp. The air smells faintly of rot, but also of wet earth, the kind that would be rich for planting if anyone dared to farm it. By midday, the horizon changes. Low stone walls appear, running parallel to the road. Ahead, you see them. Wooden palisades hastily thrown up across a gap in the wall like a crude lid over a village. From a distance, they seem unmanned, but as you draw closer, shapes move behind them. Two men step forward, halberds angled across their bodies. Their faces are mostly hidden behind strips of linen. "Stop there," one calls. His voice is muffled, but the authority in it carries. Greta slows. You both raise your hands to show you mean no harm. Mainstream historical fact. In plague years, some towns instituted early versions of quarantine, physical barriers, guarded gates, and controlled entry points. These could be surprisingly strict. Travelers were often turned away entirely, even if they carried goods the town badly needed. The guard on the left squints at you. "Where from?" You explain your last stop, a camp in the forest, and immediately regret it. The two men exchange glances. "We've had word from there," the taller one says. "Sickness has taken root." "We've been healthy," Greta says firmly, her voice calm but clipped. "We've not shared food or bedding with the sick." The shorter guard shakes his head. "Orders are clear. No outsiders. Not for 40 days. You blink. 40 days. Fringe tidbit. The term quarantine comes from the Italian 40 giorni, 40 days, first applied in the 14th century in Venetian ports, where arriving ships were kept isolated before crew could disembark. The number had a mix of practical and symbolic roots. including biblical references. The guards step back, and a third figure appears, a woman in a heavy cloak, face hidden, but voice sharp. She tells you plainly, if you try to enter by another way, you'll be treated as criminals, and if you linger by the wall, we'll send the dogs. You and Greta exchange a look. There's no discussion. You turn back toward the road, their eyes following until you're out of range. By late afternoon, you find a small rise overlooking the blocked village. You sit in the grass, chewing the last of your bread. Below, smoke curls from chimneys. Somewhere inside those walls, children's laughter floats up faintly. Greta sighs. Feels strange, doesn't it? They've built a world inside, and we're on the wrong side of it. You watch as two men unload sacks from a cart outside the palisade. They leave the goods on the ground, then retreat. Moments later, gloved figures from inside collect them. Historians still argue whether such isolation measures saved more lives than they cost. They likely slowed infection, but they also cut communities off from trade, medicine, and help, making survival inside those barricades a gamble of its own. That night, you camp far from the walls, the faint glow of the village like a warm hearth you're forbidden to approach. You wonder if someday, long after the sickness is gone, people will remember the fear more than the disease itself. At dawn, you're roused by a rustling near your pack. Your hand closes around a stick before your eyes even open fully. The sound isn't the heavy tread of a person. It's quicker, lighter, scattered. You sit up and catch the culprit darting into the weeds. A rat, no bigger than your boot, but sleek and fast with a tail like a whipcord. You glance at your bag. Your last heel of bread has a perfect little bite taken from it. Greta mutters, "They're bold." She tosses a small rock toward the grass, but another rat slips out from under your blanket. You realize with a small chill that these weren't a passing nuisance. They've been here all night. Mainstream historical fact. Black rats, Rattus rattus, thrived in medieval Europe, especially in human settlements. They climbed rafters, nested in thatch, and ate whatever food they could reach. The real danger, though, wasn't the rats themselves. It was the fleas they carried, which acted as vectors for Yersinia pestis, the bacterium-causing plague. The road that day winds through abandoned farms. Everywhere you see the same signs. Grain silos half empty, doors gnawed at the corners, chicken coops silent, except for the occasional flutter of feathers. And every so often, movement in the shadows. By midday, you're in what was once a thriving village. The houses here are close together, and the smell is heavy. Stale hay, old wood, and that faint sharpness you've come to associate with decay. Greta keeps scanning the rooftops, and you soon see why. The scurrying never stops. Fringe tidbit. Some medieval households believed rats could be repelled by carrying dried cat's blood in a pouch or by nailing a dead rat to the door as a warning to others, though modern science would say neither method worked. You take refuge in what looks like a disused barn. Greta strikes flint and steel, coaxing a small fire to life. For a while, it feels almost safe until the scratching starts. You both look up. In the hayloft, pairs of small eyes glint in the firelight. "They're watching," Greta whispers. You try to laugh it off, but the sound dies quickly. The longer you stay, the more you notice. Fleas jumping on your trousers, the faint itch on your wrist where something's already fed. Historians still argue whether the Black Death spread primarily through flea bites on rats or through human fleas and lice. In some outbreaks, the disease spread far faster than rat populations could travel, suggesting multiple pathways of transmission. That night, you wrap your blanket tight around your ankles and keep the fire going, but you still dream of scratching claws and tiny teeth. Somewhere in your sleep, the line blurs between rats in the loft and rats in your mind. You wake before dawn, uneasy, and decide without discussion that it's time to move on. Fast. By the time the sun is a thin white coin over the horizon, you're already walking. Hunger gnaws more sharply than fear now. Your pack is light, too light, and Greta's face has that pinched look that means she's running on fumes. The next village you pass through is eerily quiet. A single door swings open in the wind, slamming shut every few seconds. But just beyond the main street, you see movement. A line of makeshift stalls, canvas flapping, barrels overturned for tables. It's not a real market, more like a scattering of survivors who've decided to risk a trade or two. Mainstream historical fact. Even during plague years, some forms of commerce limped along. Open-air markets were common in rural Europe, especially when enclosed shops were shuttered to limit infection. Goods were often left on the ground, with buyers dropping coins into bowls of vinegar to clean them before pickup. You wander between the stalls. A man in a patched cloak offers you bread so hard it might as well be stone. Another woman sells dried fish, though you suspect it was left too long in the sun. Greta fingers a pouch of herbs at one table. Sage, rosemary, a twist of something bitter smelling. The merchant leans in. Keeps the sickness out, she says, eyes darting to the edge of the crowd. Fringe tidbit. Some believe that carrying aromatic bundles, called pomanders, could repel the plague. The theory was based on miasma, the idea that bad air carried disease. Wealthy folk used silver cases. Peasants made do with cloth pouches. Coins change hands awkwardly, always with a gap between fingers. People stand apart, speaking across a gulf of 2 or 3 arm lengths. The sound of haggling is subdued, more whisper than shout. Every cough, no matter how small, sends a ripple through the group. At one table, a wiry man sells proven charms, bits of polished bone on leather cords, tiny wooden crosses, a ring that he claims came from the Holy Land and will turn death aside if worn at night. Greta doesn't even look. You, though, feel the temptation, anything for a layer of protection. Historians still argue whether medieval charms offered more psychological than physical defense. Some see them as useless superstition. Others note that certain herbs and charms, like wormwood, did have flea-repelling qualities, even if the wearers didn't understand why. By midday, you've traded half your salt for a small loaf and a pouch of dried apples. Greta insists on leaving before the crowd gets thicker. The path out of town is lined with shuttered shops whose signs hang crooked. A milliner's hat symbol faded to nothing, a painted loaf for a bakery that's long cold. That night, the market's voices echo in your head, the whispered bargains, the quiet desperation. You can't decide what's more dangerous, the disease, or the way it forces everyone to become just a little more desperate, a little more willing to gamble on anything that might keep them alive. You sit by the embers, knees drawn to your chest, letting the flicker of firelight soften the harsh edges of the day. Outside, the wind scours the thatch roofs and pushes smoke sideways through the chimney cracks. Inside, it's a small island of warmth in a season that has been nothing but cold. Cold air, cold stares, cold facts whispered between clenched teeth. Greta hums quietly as she mends a tear in her sleeve. Across from you, old Tom begins a story without looking up from his cup. There was a family, he says, in the hills near St. Bridget's. They locked their door in the spring when the plague came, and when it was opened again, all of them were still alive, not a cough between them. Mainstream historical fact. In some recorded cases during the Black Death, isolated households did survive untouched, likely due to accidental quarantine. Avoiding contact was the most effective, though least understood, form of protection. Someone else chimes in, Magda, the weaver. She swears she knows of a man who survived after lying in the sun each morning, believing the warmth would burn away illness. You almost laugh, but stop when you realize no one else does. Here, every scrap of hope, no matter how improbable, is treated with quiet respect. There's a kind of ritual to these fire-lit gatherings. You take turns telling not just grim tales of who's gone, but little miracles, narrow escapes. In between, there are prayers, half-remembered songs, even a few jokes that wobble under the weight of exhaustion, but still manage to spark brief smiles. Fringe tidbit. Some communities believe that telling stories of survival or miracles could invite similar fortune. The idea was part folklore, part shared psychology. If you could imagine a way through, perhaps you could walk it. Your own voice surprises you when it joins in. You speak of the market you just left, the strange charms and vinegar-soaked coins. The group leans closer, not to judge, but to listen. The fire shifts, and for a moment you swear the shadows lean in too. Outside, the wind carries a faint toll of a distant church bell. Someone murmurs a prayer under their breath. Historians still argue whether gatherings like this helped or harmed survival odds. On one hand, the warmth and human contact bolstered morale. On the other, they could just as easily spread sickness in close quarters. Later, when the others drift off to their pallets, you stay by the fire. You watch the last ember collapse in on itself, glowing brighter for a heartbeat before dimming to black. There's a quiet stubbornness in that moment, the sense that even in the smallest light, there's something worth holding on to. You wrap your blanket tighter. The air is sharp, but you're not alone in it. Snow has a way of making everything seem gentler, until you remember what it's hiding. By the time winter clamps down, the village is quiet in a way that's more than just seasonal. The paths are half buried, roofs sag with frost, and the air feels muffled, like the world has been tucked under a heavy blanket. You step outside, your boots crunching into crusted drifts. The sky is pale, washed of color, and your breath hangs in front of you like faint smoke. In the distance, the forest edges are laced in white. You can't hear the river anymore. It's frozen, sealed under a lid of ice. Mainstream historical fact. The winter of 1349 to 1350 in parts of Europe was one of the coldest in decades. Harsh weather compounded the misery of the plague by cutting food supplies and making travel, and thus trade, nearly impossible. The cold does more than freeze water. It slows everything. The sickness, the rats, the strangers on the road. Fewer new graves are dug, not because the dead have stopped coming, but because the earth has turned to stone. Those who pass away now often stay where they are until the thaw. You learn to read the landscape in a new way. A thin wisp of chimney smoke means a household still has fuel. A completely unbroken sheet of snow on a roof means no one's been there to sweep it. And a single set of footprints, well, those you follow carefully, sometimes in hope, sometimes in dread. Fringe tidbit. Some villagers believed winter itself was a kind of cure, that the frost locked the plague inside the ground, keeping it from rising. They'd place bowls of snow near their beds, thinking the chill would keep fevers at bay. There are whispers, soft, uncertain, that the sickness is weakening. The last traveler you met, a wiry man with frost on his beard, claimed he'd passed through towns where life was returning. Children playing, market stalls reappearing, even bells ringing for weddings instead of funerals. But then, travelers say a lot of things. Historians still argue whether the plague truly faded on its own or whether it simply moved on, leaving pockets of the living in its wake. Was it the winter's grip, the loss of easy hosts, or something stranger? No one knows. Nights are the longest part. The cold gnaws through the shutters, slipping under blankets, making your bones feel brittle. But the stars, when the sky clears, are sharp and bright enough to make you forget for a moment the world below. You watch your breath rise to meet them, as though sending tiny messages to anyone who might still be looking up. And one night, you realize something. You've gone a full week without hearing the tolling bell. The silence is almost unnerving. You don't know if you can trust it, but you keep listening. When the first real warmth comes, it's so faint you almost miss it. A drip of water from the eaves, a patch of roof showing through where the snow has slid away. You press your hand against the thawing wood of the barn door and feel it, soft, damp, alive. One morning, the ice on the stream cracks like breaking glass, sending a ripple of sound across the valley. You follow it, crouching to scoop a palmful of icy water and letting it sting your skin. The air smells different now, mud, moss, and something green pushing up through the softened earth. In the village, shutters creak open. The baker's door swings wide for the first time in months. And though the shelves inside are still half bare, the smell of warm bread slips out like an invitation. You're not the only one who follows it. Faces you haven't seen in weeks, even months, step cautiously into the street. Mainstream historical fact. After the first wave of the Black Death passed, many European communities saw labor shortages so severe that peasants could demand better wages and conditions. A quiet social revolution born from unimaginable loss. You notice it in small ways. A young widow takes over her husband's tools and begins repairing fences herself. Two brothers, once too poor to own their own ox, now till a larger field abandoned by its previous owner. The old rules feel less permanent. The church bell rings again, not for mourning, but to call people together. The sound feels almost foreign in your ears. Inside, the priest's voice is softer than before, as if even he knows the old certainties have been shaken. Fringe tidbit. Some survivors wore small lead tokens stamped with the date they recovered, believing it made them immune and marked them as untouchable by future plagues. Whether it worked or not, no one dared test it. Children start to play in the muddy lanes, their laughter startling flocks of sparrows from the thatch. The market returns, with strange goods brought from villages you'd thought empty. Jars of honey, dyed cloth, even a musician with a battered lute. The first song you hear is shaky, the fingers uncertain, but the notes dance through the air like something too stubborn to be silenced. Historians still argue whether the plague's passing marked an end or a transformation, whether life truly returned or whether something entirely new was born from the ashes. You don't care what the scholars decide. You're here. You've seen it. And you carry the memory of winter, of frost and silence, of empty roads and shuttered doors. It will never leave you. But neither will the sight of your neighbors stepping into the light again. So now the streets are muddy instead of frozen, and the sky has that pale, forgiving blue that only comes after too much gray. The days feel longer, not just in hours, but in the way they stretch with possibility. You walk slower now, letting the sun soak into your skin. The smell of baking bread drifts farther, and you follow it without hurry. Someone calls your name, not urgently, not in fear, just to see if you'll turn and smile. You do. At the edge of the village, the fields are bare, but waiting. You can almost imagine them full again. Green shoots rising, bees humming, the air thick with summer warmth. The thought is enough to make your shoulders loosen, your steps lighter. The wind moves through the grass with a sound like a long sigh, and you let it match your breathing. Slow in, slow out. The world feels fragile, but also steady in its own way. You realize you've been holding yourself like a clenched fist for months, maybe years, and now you can finally open your hand. Somewhere beyond the hills, another village is waking up, another river is thawing, and someone else is feeling this same mixture of relief and disbelief. You hope they're letting themselves rest. The shadows grow longer, but they're softer now. You find a place to sit, leaning back against a warm stone wall. You close your eyes, hearing voices in the distance, not afraid of them anymore. The air smells of earth and wood smoke. For the first time in a long while, you don't need to keep watch. You can let the world turn without you just for a little while.